Ch.84, from the earth of Buyou forest, human face disease breaks out. He was a tall and burly man, dashing crazedly, and many on the streets fell as he rammed past. They complained loudly. What gives? What's up with the heated run on such a hot day? Wow, my first time seeing anyone come out without wearing their face. 15. Many started laughing as they commented, since they weren't really angry anyway. But that man rampaged all the way, and crashed himself head-on with a large, luxurious horse carriage, and blood splattered on the spot. He fell back first onto the ground in a heap, and the pedestrians who were joking around all screamed. The horse carriage owner was also shocked, poking his head out to ask, "Who was that? Who crashed into me?" Everything was so sudden, Lian had to put the matter with the boy onto the back burner for now, and he rushed over. What's happened? That man who rammed his head into the hard, solid carriage seemed to have passed out, his disheveled hair blocking his face, and there were a number of people surrounding him carefully and watching. Before Lian got close, however, he suddenly leapt up in a fit, and wailed, "I can't stand it, Anymorrree. Someone kill me. Hurry, someone come kill me!" Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Please. A few of the other burly men passing by couldn't watch any more, and commented, "Which house let their psycho loose? Take him away, geez." They were originally going to arrest that man, but when they saw that lunatic's face up close, they all screamed too, and backed away in a hurry. What is this monster? Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. That psycho man, however, chased after them, crying manically, "Hurry and beat me to death!" Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Those men were horrified. As Lian approached, they saw it was His Highness the Crown Prince, and rushed to hide behind him like he was a divine reprieve. Without blinking, Lian raised his leg and kicked, knocking that crazy man down. He tumbled a few times, ending up like a mud-covered dog. Some pointed at him. "Your Highness. This man, he has. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. No need for them to point it out, Lian also saw it, this man had two faces. Technically, it was one face, with another grown from it. The second face was squished on half the cheek of that crazy man, about the size of a palm. Although this man was young, that small face was a wrinkly old man, ugly to the core. Lian was also shocked to the core, his mind filled with only one thing: what is this monster? Exclamation mark. He immediately gripped the sword that was hung at his waist and unsheathed it. That sword was an enchanted weapon gifted to him by the heavenly martial emperor, Hongjing. Ever since he met that white-clothed character, he had kept this sword on his person at all times in case there was a need for it. Just maybe, he'd get to see that creature's true form one of these days. Under the current circumstances, that sword was certainly useful. Once unsheathed, the shine of that blade was brighter than snow. Yet, when he looked, the reflection on that blade did not change whatsoever. It was still just this man, and it was still just those two terrifying faces. That meant this crazy man wasn't in any shape or form a monster. Or a demon. He was indeed human. However, was there really anyone in the world who would have such a growth? If he was born this way, then how could it not be known within the royal capital after years? Si Lian was both astonished and suspicious, and suddenly, someone on the side spoke up with a quivering voice. How did he become like this? Hearing him, Si Lian immediately sheathed Hongjing and turned his head. You know him. Was he not like this before? A number of people replied, we know him. We used to work with him. Of course he's not like this. Before, his face, how could it have something like this? Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Seeing that the crowd was growing bigger, almost to the point of blocking the whole main street with a grave expression, Si Lian inhaled and shouted loudly and clearly. Everyone, don't come close. It's nothing, break it up. That bandaged boy helped him keep the crowd away, but Si Lian didn't notice. He was busy calling for Feng Xin and Mu King in the communication array. Come quickly to the Martial Deity Avenue in the royal capital. After lowering his hand, he saw another close by who looked tentative and floundering, exceedingly hesitant, so Si Lian took a step towards him. Do you have something you want to say? With the Crown Prince's query, that man seemed to have found courage, and said, Your Highness, there's something I don't know if I should tell. Si Lian had no time to listen to him ramble winding words, and cut in bluntly. Get to the point. A few days ago, some bumps appeared on my chest, 3 big ones and 2 small ones. I didn't feel anything. They don't itch or hurt, and they actually feel pretty good when you nudge at them. I didn't think much of them, but seeing this buddy here, I'm feeling pretty, like I might be punished for something. Yano, ha. He laughed flatly and loosened his robe, showing his chest. There's nothing wrong with me, is there? The moment he took off his robe, everyone fell silent. On the chest of that man wasn't just some bumps. It was clearly the blurry face of a woman with all 5 of her senses intact. That man looked down and was also shocked. How did it become like this? Exclamation mark. It clearly wasn't that lifelike, realistic. No matter what adjective used, it was fully horrifying. Everyone around was terrified, and in spite of himself, that man grabbed onto the hem of Si Lian's robe and cried, Your Highness, save me. At that same moment, Feng Xin and Mu King received his call and came rushing over by the towers. Seeing the picture before them, they both furrowed their brows. Feng Xin shouted, Stand back. What are you playing at? Si Lian didn't have the time to explain. He patted that man's shoulders and comforted, Don't worry. Keep calm. His tone of voice was warm and firm, serious but kind. That man thought Si Lian had everything under control, and believed without a doubt that a small matter like this was nothing to His Highness the Crown Prince, and so he relaxed. However, Si Lian's mind was in turmoil. That human face was actually something that grew gradually. And those with the symptoms, he would call it a symptom for now. It wasn't only just the one person. Then, dare he assume there were many more? He immediately gave Feng Xin and Mu King a rough account and commanded, "Report this to the palace. Pass down this order, search the whole city and see if there's anyone else with similar affliction. Do not miss a single one." Because that thing was so shocking, once the king received the news, he made it a priority, dispatching a large number of troops to search and investigate, the work highly efficient and effective. By that night it was confirmed within the entire royal capital, there were already 5 people with faintly visible faces growing on their bodies. Of those 5, either they saw and didn't take it to heart, or that faces were growing in areas not easily detected. In addition, that faces didn't itch or hurt, so they wouldn't have noticed. Other than that, there were over 10 others who had shallow bumps appearing on their bodies, no doubt the still immature faces. In this group of 20-some people, there were more women and youth, when they were sent forth before Si Lian, one after the other. They were filled with unease and greeted each other, comforting one another at the same time. Initially, Si Lian was speaking to someone on the side, taking care of some business, but when he noticed him, he felt something was amiss. He asked, "Do you all know each other?" The officials, who had worked all night, briefly glanced at their report and replied, "Your Highness, many of them live on the outskirts of the royal capital, fairly close together, so maybe they've crossed paths as neighbors. Many who lived in the same area." Mu King was aghast. People who live close together all grew those human faces. That thing is contagious. Si Lian thought of it faster than he did, he just didn't say it as fast. Immediately, he commanded, "Isolate them. Disperse the non-affected, don't let anyone come close to this place. Find a place to quarantine everyone here. A contagious strange disease." When those words leaked out, it was more effective than the order to disperse any strong arming troops. Not only did the onlooking crowd scatter, more than half the houses on the street emptied out. Si Lian ordered for the officials and soldiers he had appointed to gear up for protection, and brought those 20-some people to the outskirts of the royal capital where some of them lived. Nearby the residential area, on the outskirts, there was a large forest called Buyou. The government officials had intended to build a quarantine there to temporarily settle the sick. However, when they entered the woods, while others were busy building camp, Si Lian was feeling more and more unsettled. The more he walked, Feng Xin and Mu King noticed too. It was Feng Xin who spoke up first. "Your Highness, isn't this where that Lang Ying?" Si Lian dropped his hands by his side, frowning deeply. "Yeah. It was here. This Buyou forest was the very place that Lang Ying had bare-handedly dug and buried the dead body of his son." Having realized this, the 3 looked at each other. Although they couldn't put their fingers on it, a rough guess was forming in their minds, pushing for them to start searching for the place where Lang Ying had buried the corpse that day. Yet, it had been months, and with so many trees in the Buyou forest, how could they possibly remember exactly which tree the child was buried under? Just then, an indescribably foul stench wafted in the air. That disgusting stink was somewhat like that of a rotten corpse, but was even more suffocating. Just one breath, and it could knock a man out. Others smelt it too and started backing away, covering their noses and fanning. What's over there? What's going on? Exclamation mark.
It's worse than a 10-year-old pickle jar.
Si Lian rushed forward and followed the terrifying smell, and sure enough, he came to a familiar-looking crooked tree. The earth under the tree was slightly raised, forming a benign mound. The soldiers raised their swords and gathered to protect Si Lian, but he raised his hand to stop them.
He said gravely, "Be careful.
Normal people shouldn't come close." The not normal person Feng Xin grabbed a shovel off-handedly and approached. After a few shovels, that mud mound became a ditch, the foul stench grew heavier, and Feng Xin dug more mindfully. After another few shovels, a small black thing was dug out, and it seemed to be squirming. Feng Xin slowed his movement, and the soldiers reacted like they were facing a great enemy. Suddenly,
the earth arched up, and a swollen, bloated giant body broke out from the soil, exposing itself before the
torch-holding crowd. That rotten foul stench surged instantly, and most of the people on site threw up on the spot. Si Lian's pupils shrank. That thing couldn't be described as human anymore. Anything would be more human than it. No one would be able to tell that this gigantic corpse was once a small, emaciated child. The urge to vomit rolled up to his throat, and Si Lian looked away. Feng Xin and Mu King were dumbfounded too, blurting,
"What's this?"
Exclamation mark. Is that a curse or a simple rotten corpse? No matter what that thing was, Si Lian knew what they needed to do.
Stand back.
The further the better. I'm going to burn that thing.
He raised his hand and a large stream of flames blew out. Just as the fire was ablaze and the smoke was
thick, the sharp sound of a battle horn from the distant royal capital came, loud and shrill, calling all to order. The three looked up at the same time. That was the signal of an enemy attack.
Feng Xin cussed.
Fuck, of all times they had to come now. Mu King's face was dark, looking gloomy even under firelight.
Maybe this was intentional.
Si Lian made the call. Mu King, you stay here and take care of this.
Feng Xin, you come with me.
We'll
repel them first.
Remember, don't let them notice any weak points. That night, the two hurriedly rushed out of the city fortress, and hurriedly fought a battle. Although that battle came out of the blue, they still won. Even if they won, however, none of the Xianlei soldiers, Si Lian included, felt the joy of victory. That strange disease that appeared so randomly came to be called the human face disease by the
people. Words of it passed through the royal capital like lightning, causing uproar and great unease.
The king had considered blacking out the news, but the first victim had rampaged the streets. There were countless witnesses, so this was something that couldn't be hidden from the start. Besides, the human face disease was spreading rapidly. In just 6 days, over 50 people found similar afflictions appearing on their bodies. All at the same time, the sieges from Yonggan were increasing.
Attacked from both sides, Si Lian could
barely find the time to go to Yonggan and create rain. All the spiritual power and energy for it was all spent at the quarantine in the outskirts instead. Within the chilly Buyou forest, large fields of temporary tents and huts were built. Si Lian crossed through a ground full of patients. This quarantine started with 20-some people, but soon it turned into hundreds, and was growing ever bigger. Every day, Si Lian would come if there was time, and use his power to relieve the horrifying symptoms of those affected. However, he still couldn't cure the root cause. And what the people had hoped was to have him heal them completely. As Si Lian walked, a young man lying on the ground suddenly raised his hand and tugged the hem of his robe.
Your Highness, I won't die, will I?
Si Lian was about to respond and noticed that this man looked familiar. Upon a closer look, wasn't he the passerby who gave him an umbrella on that rainy day he learned Xianlei was short on water? Recalling that day, that rain, that umbrella, warmth filled Si Lian's heart, and he knelt down, gently
patting that young man's arm.
He told him in a serious tone, I will do my best. That man seemed to have received the hope to survive, his eyes twinkled with joy, repeating, good, good,
and laid down again.
From those fervent eyes, Si Lian could tell they truly believed he could do it. Thus, every time he met those eyes, a sense of self-blame would grow deep in his heart, and the need to find a cure grew more desperate.
After making a round through the quarantine, Si Lian found a place to sit.
Mu King started a campfire,
and Si Lian sat, deep in thought.
Some distance away, a few errand boys walked off carrying a stretcher, muttering to each other, yet somehow their words had reached Si Lian's ears. How many is this now? The fourth or fifth, I think. On the stretcher was a patient who died in Buyou forest.
In truth, it was hard to die from the human face.
Disease. Yet that was even more frightening. Without death, it meant that for the rest of the victims' lives,
those things would stay on their bodies. Just thinking about it would make one lose the will to live.
Especially young women, they care for their faces, so if something like that were to grow on somewhere important like their face, most would choose to end their lives. Another sighed.
Sigh.
When will this end?
Another said, we have His Highness the Crown Prince, we won't lose.
Just relax. The one who complained said, I'm not afraid of losing battles. But with the situation like this, does it matter if we don't lose battles? It's not easy for us civilians to live on like this. Sigh, never mind. Never mind. I'm not complaining.
Just pretend I said nothing.
I said nothing. If Feng Xin was there, he would have immediately rushed up to cuss him out. Mu King, however, only gave Si Lian a look, and continued to build the fire, not saying anything. Only when those two were completely gone did he say flatly, ignorant commoners only know how to blame others and the heavens. Did they think a martial god has control over everything?
Si Lian shook his head.
What those men said had logic. He was a martial god. When he was part of the army, there would be no battles unwon. Yet, at times like these, what use was it to win battles? Forming
an army was to protect the civilians. Yet if the civilians were all suffering from the attack of a plague, then wouldn't their advantage turn into a joke?
Just then, the campfires wavered, and another sat down next to Si Lian. It was Feng Xin, who had returned. Si Lian asked immediately, "How is it?" Feng Xin shook his head. "It was exactly the same as when you searched. There's no traces of Lang Ying on Bezi Hill, and nothing of that white-clothed character. Who knows where they're hiding, and there's no way of confirming whether they're the ones behind this. Also, the Yong'an people were all fine, like we suspected, not a single case of the human face disease." Liu King poked at the fire.
The royal capital and Bezi Hill are so close, there's no way no one was
infected. It's easy to see that they must be the ones behind all this. Many believed this secretly, and thinking this way made sense. However, even if they accused Lang Ying secretly or openly, the man was well hidden away and they couldn't find any proof, so they could do nothing. They suspected the human face disease was started by a curse, and the source of that curse was the corpse of Lang Ying's son. Yet, if it was a curse, then it was a good one.
It didn't leave any traces for them
to investigate, so there was no evidence to confirm their suspicions. And who knew, maybe this human face disease was nothing more than a new, naturally formed plague. There was no way Si Lian could
draw any conclusions on what the disease actually was unless they apprehended the suspect.
He had given the heavenly court a rough report of his assumptions, too.
Yet, as aforementioned, Si Lian's descent was a transgression. Unlike the past, where if he wanted to report something he could very
well just barge into the great martial hall and scream in Jun Wu's ear, now he had to do it by the books. It must be known that by the books meant, if lucky, just throwing out hefty amounts of merits would pass words through to the heavenly officials. If unlucky, he might be forced to go through complicated red tape, roped in endless delays. Afterwards, it'd still only be some other heavenly officials who'd be sent forth.
Si Lian himself was a heavenly official, and other than Jun Wu, there were very few who could match him in
power, so the heavenly officials sent forth might not even be effective. Jun Wu carried a heavy burden. By
mortal words, he was a machine, with a host of problems to deal with every day, so there was no way he
could come to Si Lian's aid in person.
Thus, his reporting was only for show, and Si Lian didn't expect
anything to come of it. Moreover, none of that was what's on Si Lian's mind. It was another problem. He spoke, if we assume that Yong'an used a curse for the sake of defeating the royal capital, then the most effective attack would be to the army. Once the army falls, wouldn't that be the same as opening the gates? It wasn't that there were no victims of the human face disease in the army, but in comparison, they were few in number, only 3 or 4 affected. And once they were sent to quarantine, the situation was
immediately under control and nothing spread.
Feng Xin seemed to have thought of something, and said, maybe they think even if they defeat the army with you around they'd still lose, so they gave up on the army and targeted civilians directly.
Hearing this, Liu King chuckled dryly.
Feng Xin immediately reacted. What are you laughing about? Nothing. You always manage to bring up good points.
I have nothing to say, Liu King replied.
People who bore the intent to snipe at others but still pretended to sound courteous annoyed Feng Xin the most, so he ignored him completely. If it was them, then they're despicable. Fight honestly on the battlefield if they've the guts, but don't use Shady tricks to harm innocent civilians.
Si Lian wholeheartedly agreed, and sighed. I've been thinking these past few days just what causes the
infection.
We have to know the causes before we can control the disease.
Isn't it obvious? Feng Xin said. Infection comes from getting too close, touching, drinking the same water, eating together, sleeping together or whatever. Si Lian rubbed his forehead. On the surface, that's not wrong. But take the army for example, the soldiers in the army all drink, eat, and sleep together, and are in closer quarters than any other households, so why aren't there more soldiers infected? Liu King furrowed his brows. So what you mean is, even under the same circumstances with different body types, some will be infected and others not.
You want to find out just what kind of people are
immune to the human face disease, right? Si Lian raised his head. Liu King, you understand me? That's exactly it. If we can find that out, then there might be a way to stop the human face disease from spreading.
Liu King nodded. Good. Then let's look at it this way. What kind of people are more likely to get infected?
What type of patients dominate the quarantine of Buyou Forest? Si Lian had walked through the camps endlessly the past few days, and could answer even with his eyes closed. He said immediately, women, children, teens, seniors, and young men who are smaller in build. Feng Xin wondered, so only the weak get infected? Should we have the king order for everyone in the
royal capital to work out and strengthen their bodies?
Si Lian and Liu King both gave him a look, not wanting to respond.
After a pause, Feng Xin himself added, wait, that's not right.
Next chapter. Ch.85 From the earth of Buyou Forest, human face disease emerges too. Obviously it wasn't right, because the first victim that rampaged the martial deity avenue was a healthy and strong burly man, so the theory didn't hold up.
Just how were the soldiers infected with the human face disease different from other soldiers?
Si Lian
thought of many possibilities and tried testing his guesses. But no matter from which angle, there wasn't
anything overly obvious that differentiated them from the others. Every infected victim, no matter their
looks, their body type, their status, their temperament, everything was all over the place, impossible to
draw a conclusion on the defining criteria. Could it be that whoever got infected really was a matter of chance? Si Lian mumbled to himself, just what did those soldiers do in order to stop the spreading of the human face disease?
In other words, just what did they do that was more often done than civilians?
When he came to this thought, his eyes suddenly widened, and his face paled.
Hearing that, his voice
stopped abruptly. Feng Xin asked, what's wrong, Your Highness? Have you thought of something?
Si Lian had indeed thought of something.
He thought of a logical theory, but at the same time, it was a
terrifying one.
He stood up in a flash and blurted, no way. No, it shouldn't be like this. It can't be. Feng Xin and Liu King immediately rose too. What is it? Si Lian held his forehead and paced back and forth, raising his hand. Hold on. I have an absurd guess. It shouldn't be true, but I need to test this out. What guess? Liu King asked. How will you test it? Do you need me to find you someone?
Si Lian immediately rejected the idea.
No. We can't use a live person for testing. What if I'm wrong? It was more like he hoped he was wrong, even better if he was way off the mark. Liu King frowned. Your Highness, if you need to ascertain whether you're right or wrong, you'll need a live person for testing. That's the best way.
Just standing here brooding won't do any good.
Feng Xin frowned, too. Can't you see he's troubled? Stop saying things that annoy people.
Liu King turned to him.
Weird. And what exactly did I say? Didn't I speak the truth? At this point, what's the use in being all indecisive and hesitant?
Feng Xin was disgusted.
Do you have to judge everything based on how useful something is? We're
talking about a live person here.
Not even a bit of hesitation, aren't you a little too collected? Collected? Liu King countered. You actually want to say cold-blooded, right? Si Lian hadn't the patience to ease up the fight between the two like he usually did, and said the two of you can start arguing over a single word, what a disgrace. Stand here for an incense time. No one's allowed to move within that time. Same old rules. Hearing the words, same old rules, both Feng Xin and Liu King's faces changed colors.
Si Lian waved.
Heaven officials' blessings. Start. A moment later, Feng Xin said, gritting his teeth, blessings shine from up high. Liu King gritted his teeth, too. High imitation, no thought.
Feng Xin was in trouble.
Thought. He was deep in strenuous thought, trying to think of a way to continue, and Si Lian turned to enter Buyou Forest to find those 3 infected soldiers for questioning. By same old rules, it was an idea Si Lian had come up with to distract the other 2. Feng Xin and Liu King would snipe at each other at every chance, starting disputes from nothing. At first, Si Lian would make them stand in silence for an incense time without speaking to one another until they calmed down. But it wasn't very effective. Afterwards, Si Lian decided to change it to idiom trains. Once there was an established winner and loser, they'd have no time to worry about their original conflict and would instead do the best to crush the other in training idioms. After discovering this effective method, Si Lian felt the world became more peaceful, and was quite satisfied. Forcing them to train idioms now was also something of a way to have everyone ease up a little. Yet this ease didn't last for long. After an incense time, Si Lian returned. His face was grim, and he instructed, bring me all the soldiers who lived in the same quarters as those infected soldiers. I need to question them.
Those 2 were already stumped many times, and seized their own proper little victories, so when they
didn't need to train idioms anymore, they both sighed in relief. That's fine, too.
But using such a roundabout way to find proof, it might not guarantee the accuracy of
your findings, Liu King said.
Feng Xin had already turned to heed his orders. Si Lian called him back. Wait. It's already deep into the night.
Questioning them now would be too much of a stir, and we can't call forth too many at a time either, it'd be too conspicuous. The things I want to ask must not be known or leaked. If you go now, we won't be able to hide anything. Feng Xin turned his head. Then what should I do? Bring 'em over to you one by one to have you
interrogate them privately.
There's no other way, Si Lian said. Tomorrow, bring the soldiers who are close to the victims to me.
One by one to my chambers, and don't let them know that others have been questioned.
Remember to
order them not to tell anyone, otherwise.
He breathed in deeply and sighed. Never mind, just threaten them. Just say if word got out they shall be executed without mercy. The more savage the better. Questioning them one by one, how long would that even take?
Mu King commented.
It doesn't matter how long it takes, Si Lian said.
The more I ask, the more I can be sure.
I absolutely need to get to the bottom of this, and there mustn't be any mistakes.
Thus, the next day, Si Lian sat in the chamber that had been temporarily assigned to him atop the
towers, and personally interrogated over 300 soldiers. As for the questions he posed, all 300 of them all gave the same answers. After questioning each one, Si Lian's face would grow a shade darker. After it was done, when Feng Xin and Mu King
entered the room, they saw Si Lian sitting by the table, a hand holding up his forehead, unspeaking.
It was a while before he slowly spoke up. You two stay and guard the city gates. I'm going to make a trip to Mount Taikang. Feng Xin hesitantly asked, Your Highness, did you find something out from all the questioning? Is it a
curse, or?
Si Lian nodded.
It's come to light.
It's a curse. Mu King was solemn. For real.
Without a doubt, Si Lian said.
And I also found out just what type of person gets infected, and what type doesn't. Even if those were the words spoken, on his face there was not a trace of joy from solving the mystery.
And so Feng Xin and Mu King felt things might not be that simple.
However, if Si Lian didn't take the initiative to tell him, then as his subordinates it wasn't their place to ask, and so their hearts sank.
Silently.
Mount Taikang, the Royal Holy Pavilion, the highest peak, the Great Martial Hall. Guoshi was paying his respects within clouds of incense smoke. Si Lian crossed the threshold of the hall and immediately went
straight to the point.
Guoshi, I need to see the Heavenly Emperor. Guoshi finished paying his respects and turned his head. Your Highness, the gates of the heavenly realm no longer open to you.
I know, Si Lian said.
But right now, I've ascertained that the kingdom of Xianlei is currently under the attack of a malicious wave of curses that have never been seen before. This isn't a natural disaster, it's the
working of inhuman creatures.
Please give me a hand and request the Heavenly Emperor to descend and possess your spirit so I can report this information to him directly. Maybe he'd know what the source of all this was, and perhaps find a turning point.
Ever since he'd returned to the mortal realm, he had reported to the Great Martial Hall thrice.
Yet the first 2 times weren't sincere, and were only done out of habitual courtesy. This time, he really wanted to
seek help.
Guoshi sat down on a chair and said, It's not that I don't want to help you, Your Highness, but there's no longer a need for it.
Even if I give you a hand now, and the Heavenly Emperor descends and possesses my
body, the answer you will receive from him will only disappoint you. Si Lian's face dropped slightly. Do you know something? Do you know just what that Christ smile mask wearing white clothed being is? Your Highness, do you still remember what I told you? Guoshi said. That in this world, fortune, good or bad, is predetermined. Si Lian was startled and didn't speak. The Guoshi added, Originally, many of those from Yonggan were destined to die, but you transferred water and created rain, and gave them a breath of relief. Yet you cannot save them completely from the drought, cannot settle their future, so now, they are in the Yongan army upon Buyou Hill, fighting for their
futures. Originally, the royal capital was destined to be in a state of decline. But then you personally descended,
and used your own powers to turn things around, and gave the royal capital a breath of relief. Yet you
didn't steel your heart to annihilate the Yongan rebel army and root them out.
Instead, you allowed them to survive until now. Like cockroaches, they only get stronger with each battle. Guoshi asked him in wonder, Your Highness, may I ask what you are doing? Are you perhaps waiting for both sides to realize their mistakes?
To repent and renew?
To reunite as one country once more?
An odd sense of shame budded within Si Lian's heart, yet, it soon turned into confusion as he thought to
himself, that's strange. Whether I saved or protected people, it was all because they were innocent and
didn't deserve death.
Everything I've done was done after serious consideration, and every choice was
made after much struggle.
Yet why does it sound so laughable coming from another's mouth? Why does it
sound like I've achieved nothing, that everything is such a failure?
That word appeared in his mind and he immediately blocked it out.
Guoshi added, You used your divinity to interfere in mortal matters.
The predetermined fate of the
kingdom of Xianlei has been turned completely upside down by you, a complete and utter mess.
For the sake of balance, nature will breed other things to bring everything you've derailed back on track. I don't know what that creature was, but I am certain it was born because of you. Si Lian's form faltered. Guoshi continued, I am also certain that, should the heavenly martial emperor see you, he will also tell you the same thing, because this was the reason why he didn't want you to descend in the first place.
But
I feel that even if he told you then, you would have more than likely come down anyway. Young people are like this, unheeding of advice. They won't believe they can't walk until they've fallen.
Si Lian was in disbelief.
So you mean to say that the cause of this human face disease was me? Exclamation mark.
So by
that so-called predetermined fate logic, everything that uncrying, unlawful creature does is my fault.
So, the heavenly court wouldn't even bother with this whole thing.
You can think of it that way, Guoshi said. But that's not altogether right either. After all, if you must
read fortune all the way, you can also blame your father and your mother, because if they didn't give birth
to you, then you wouldn't have ascended, and thus you wouldn't have descended. Reading like this, you can blame your entire Xianlei ancestry. So, discussing who is at fault for the cause is meaningless. As for your last question, that's right, they won't. Because the kingdom of Xianlei was destined to fall. Since you've extended your hand and messed up this game of chess, then, there will for sure be another hand that returns all the messed up pieces back in place.
Si Lian took a deep breath, not wanting to discuss whether the kingdom of Xianlei was destined to fall.
He closed his eyes for a minute, then said, Then answer me, Guoshi.
If I disappear now, will that creature
also disappear? I'm afraid not, Guoshi replied. Easy come, hard to leave. That's the same for gods, and ghosts and demons are no different. Si Lian knew any more talk would be pointless. The only one who could keep fighting was only himself. He bowed to Guoshi, bidding farewell, and prepared to leave. Behind him, the Guoshi called, Your Highness.
How do you plan on walking your path from now on? Si Lian had his head down.
If nothing changes, even if I disappear, then I will fight it to the end. This is my only path. After a pause, he raised his head high and enunciated every word, I don't care if there's a hand or what. But the people I protect will never become its pawn. Half a month later, Lang Ying led the Yonggan army and attacked once again.
After months of countless battles big and small, the Yonggan troops could now finally be called an army.
They were no longer those forlorn refugees, but a proper army with considerable strength. It was like Lang Ying had evaporated from the mortal realm for a long time, this time, when Si Lian saw
this man again on the battlefield. Having waited for so long, he didn't waste his breath. He dashed straight past the troops, facing him, and struck with his sword, shouting, Where's that
white-clothed man? Lang Ying blocked his sword and didn't answer, fighting back with vigor. Si Lian pressed onto him with
each step.
You know who I'm talking about.
My patience is limited.
Unexpectedly, Lang Ying stared at him, and asked, Your Highness, didn't you say that Yonggan would
continue to reign? Si Lian hadn't expected for him to ask that question. Startled, words got stuck in his throat.
He did indeed promise Lang Ying that Yonggan would reign.
However, in the past many days, the number of
infected by the human face disease within the royal capital had been increasing exponentially, and they were reaching almost 500 at this point. Those 500 victims couldn't all be settled in Buyou forest, and that quarantine camp was running out of space.
The government officials were
debating over moving to a farther, bigger place.
Most of Si Lian's powers had been used to relieve the
symptoms of those 500 people, and he had none left to create rain in Yonggan. Since he couldn't make use of the Rain Master hat, he felt bad keeping someone else's spiritual device in hand, so with no other way, he sent Feng Xin to the kingdom of Yushi to return the Rain Master hat to the Rain Master and
gave thanks.
Si Lian struck again, yelling angrily, I created that rain. Don't you have any clue why it stopped?
Exclamation mark.
The angrier he became, the more calm Lang Ying was. That has nothing to do with me. I only know that even without the human face disease, your powers won't last for long, just like how even with your reign, not many will survive in Yonggan. It's all pointless. Your Highness, why do you think you can achieve anything you want to do?
Rather than putting my fate in your hands, I choose to put it in my own.
Something from that speech had provoked Si Lian, and the intent to kill flared. His blade turned slightly, and his left hand raised. A voice screamed inside his head, Kill this man, and the remnant Yonggan army will be nothing to be afraid of.
Since the first time they met, this was the very first time Si Lian had steeled his heart to kill Lang Ying.
However, unexpectedly, when he sent a blow from his palm and blasted Lang Ying's heart, he spewed blood from the blow, but the blast did not penetrate his heart, instead, it was repelled.
Astonished, Si Lian couldn't believe it, and backed away a few steps. You! Exclamation mark.
Si Lian knew very well what it was that repelled his attack. Those who were destined for greatness in the mortal realm, like kings, geniuses, and vigilantes. Whenever they come to a dire situation, their bodies would naturally radiate a protective aura, shielding
them against harm.
Most of them had the potential for ascension. Lang Ying was no more than a boar, yet
he radiated that very protective spiritual aura, and it was even one that was exceedingly rare, the aura of a king.
Si Lian didn't dare to think what it meant, and suddenly he felt his heart go cold.
It was Lang Ying's
sword that thrusted and impaled his chest. In that battle, there was no victory or defeat on either side. There were still many who perished from Yonggan's side, but this time Xianlei wasn't any better. If it was anyone else, they could say it was a hard-won battle, but to Si Lian, this was definitely defeat.
This was the first time he was at a disadvantage. Moreover, although Lang Ying was still no match for Si Lian and retreated with injuries in the end, many saw the scene where Lang Ying had stabbed him. Si Lian could probably guess that there were many soldiers talking behind his back. His Highness is a martial god, how could he be stabbed? Aren't we the army of God? How come we didn't achieve an overwhelming victory like before? However, Si Lian had absolutely no time for such noise, because Mu King had informed him that today another 100-some human face disease patients had been sent to Buyou Forest. One short day, and over 100. Now, the first group of human face disease victims had worsened severely. Not a single spot on their bodies could be seen. They had to be covered in thick covers, lest they scare people. However, even through the covers, those bumps could still be seen on the body's contours. Si Lian walked around to alleviate the symptoms, and when he finally finished a round, Feng Xin pulled him aside and asked him in a low voice, "Your Highness, what happened on the battlefield today? How could you get stabbed by that boar? You also struck him so many times, why didn't you just kill him?" Si Lian didn't want to tell him that there was now a layer of a king's aura on Lang Ying that not even heavenly officials could touch, and could only grimace. It wasn't that he didn't want to kill him, it was that he could no longer kill him. All the spiritual powers in his attacks were dissolved by that king's aura, and nothing worked against Lang Ying. When he realized this, he instantly changed to fist-fighting, but that Lang Ying was thick-skinned and could withstand quite the beating. Just then, a distance away there was suddenly a loud wail. "Your Highness, save me." Si Lian was just accepting a bowl of water that Feng Xin passed to him, and that wail came just as he was taking his first sip. Si Lian choked, and didn't have the time to stop before he rushed over. The one who wailed was that young man who gave him that umbrella, and because Si Lian was extra warm towards him, his screaming for help was also extra frequent. At first the part of this man that grew a face was his knee. Si Lian had cast his power to stop the disease from spreading, and so only his left leg had the face and nowhere else. Right then, he was kicking that leg madly, going hysterical. Si Lian held him down and comforted, "Don't move. I'm here." That young man was frightened to the core and grabbed onto him. "Your Highness. Your Highness. Save me. I felt an itch on my leg just now, like some weed was scratching me, but when I looked down, I saw those things. Their mouths were opening and closing, moving. They're moving. They're eating grass. Eating grass. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. They're alive. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Hair on Si Lian's back raised instantly.
He looked down and sure enough, on that young man's left leg, there were over 10 faces tightly pressed together. Many of their mouths were stuffed with grass, some were even chewing like they were starving.
Many of the patients started screaming. The crowd blew up in uproar, and Feng Xin and the soldiers had
to use force to subjugate him to prevent a riot. Si Lian used a hand to hold that young man down, and turned to another beside him to ask, "Can this leg
still work?"
All the nursing staff at Buyou Forest had to be in full gear, and were dressed in bandages and capes,
wrapping themselves tight, their faces unrecognizable. One of the workers on the side answered. His voice
sounded like a boy's. "No, Your Highness. His leg is already forfeit. We don't know what else is festering. The leg is heavy like a
block of lead, and we could hardly move it.
The infection is also climbing. Soon it'll grow beyond the leg and reach the waist." Si Lian had done his utmost to use his powers for healing, yet that young man's leg could be said to be beyond saving, having lost almost all normal functions. Just then, one of the doctors whispered, "Your Highness, in my opinion, the only thing we haven't tried is cutting off the part with the faces, and see if that'd slow down the fester."
The only way Si Lian could think of was also this.
Then cut it off. That young man immediately cried, "No." He was terrified of having his limbs cut off, but at the same time he didn't dare to hug his deformed leg, and cried in pain,
"My leg is not forfeit.
Maybe it'll get better, Your Highness. Don't you have any other way to save me?" Si Lian didn't want to answer with, "I'll do my best," or "I'll try," anymore. His sight was going dark, and he replied, "Sorry, I don't."
That His Highness the Crown Prince would say such a thing, it was the first time, shocking everyone
present. There were some who lost it right then and there, and screamed, "No!
You're His Highness, you're a god, how do you have no way?
We've been waiting
for you to come up with something for days, how can you have nothing?"
Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. The one who spoke was immediately held down by someone, yet it wasn't Feng Xin or Mu King. Mu King was silent and frowning, seeming to have thought Si Lian's answer was too blunt, and couldn't comfort
the masses.
Feng Xin, on the other hand, was further away, yelling at the particularly rowdy patients.
Si
Lian was battered and exhausted recently, his sword never sheathed and hung on his waist. When the
blade came close to that leg, one of the faces felt the chill of the blade's aura, and suddenly stopped
chewing. It opened its mouth and let out a shrill scream. That thing actually screamed.
Exclamation mark.
Exclamation mark.
Although the sound was soft, it most definitely came from that leg.
That young man screamed, almost
fainting from fright, and he clung onto Si Lian, crying,
"Your Highness, save me! Save me!"
At the same time, on his waist close to his thigh, 3 shallow sores appeared.
That doctor shouted in alarm, "Your Highness, it's spreading! It's spreading! The infection is spreading out of the leg." No matter how much spiritual power was spent, Si Lian still could not control that young man's condition. In the end, seeing that those horrifying things were about to spread over his entire body, once that
happened there would be no going back.
Could they really do naught but sit back and watch? Si Lian gritted his teeth. "Let me ask you one thing.
Do you or do you not want this leg?
I can't guarantee what would happen once it's gone. If you don't want it, just nod and we'll operate immediately.
If you want it, then don't nod, and we'll figure it out.
That young man was breathing heavily, his eyes blank from terror, his mind lost. It was like he was nodding but also shaking his head. Those faces on his left leg started screaming one by one, as if welcoming their new companions. In between all the yes and aahhhhs, the delight on their faces was apparent, and their little red tongues were quivering. It was hard to imagine just what the
insides of that young man's left leg looked like, just what it harbored.
This couldn't be delayed any further. Lian instructed the doctor. Cut it off. That doctor, however, waved his hand rapidly. Your Highness, forgive me. I'm not very sure either, and I don't dare operate in a place like this. If cutting doesn't do anything, then we shouldn't take this risk. He cursed himself for speaking up. The nail that stuck out got hammered down. What was he doing? Fighting for such a terrifying job. He escaped back to the crowd and stopped talking.
That young man was mumbling repeatedly, Your Highness save me, Your Highness save me. Yet Lian's mind was completely blank, a voice full of hopelessness also rumbling inside him. Who
can come and save me? Exclamation mark.
It was noisy and rowdy all around, screaming and crying everywhere. Those twisted little human faces
squished below were also wailing, and in that moment, Lian thought he saw hell. It was like he was peering at this hell but at the same time unseeing, and with cold sweat rolling, he
widened his eyes, raised his arm.
The sword slashed down, and blood spattered.